Welcome to the Drill Down in-depth answers to oilfield questions. I'm John Spears.
And I'm Richard Spears.
Richard, glad to have you back.
I was in an undisclosed location for the last month.
Good for you.
I'm better now.
Well, now I know there's a lot of stuff going on now that you're back. A lot of questions folks are asking us. And, of course, one that I'm fielding a lot, and I know you are too, is
are you the only brother that actually works? That's the question. Like, apparently John's the only one who works. That's the question.
Never leave the office,
got.
yeah. Well, the question I'm thinking of is because it's, end of the year budgeting season for operators and service firms alike. And as is often the case, folks are trying to figure out what oil companies are going to do next year, right? And how much money they're going to spend, what their drilling programs are going to look like, because that's key to the service industry. And in a lot of cases, the questions that come to us start with, well, what do you think the price of oil is going to be next year?
So what do you tell them?
And, I don't,
wait, that's what the podcast is going to be about.
Actually, it's a little bit different because the question is, well, if our oil price is going to go up, and if they go up X amount, how much more activity are we going to see out in the field, rig count and whatnot? So I've been trying to talk with folks about what I think is the right way to think about that, because in the past, as an industry, we've known that it's been pretty good that if oil prices go up $10, you're going to see a corresponding percentage increase in rig activity.
And if
I don't think that works anymore.
If oil goes up to 100, we spend like a drunken sailor.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because as an industry, the statistics would tell you that oil companies have generally spent 100% of their cash flow. They haven't retired any debt. There have been a few pennies given back to shareholders, but not much. So any improvement in cash flow generally goes right to rig count.
And you know why that is.
Well, yeah, but you're going to tell me.
The oil companies have been rewarded for growth.
That's right. Yeah,
they have not been rewarded for dividend payments.
Yeah, that's right.
Give me growth.
Yeah,
and that's what I want.
But this is a different world. It's sort of like, we were talking about this earlier, it's sort of like if you were able to borrow money and only needed to pay back interest. You could do that, and then you'd have money presumably left over for fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. Like, for example, I'm going to try to do this in my head.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
If you borrowed $1 million and you bought $1 million house,
right.
and all you had to do was pay back interest of 4%,
right? Yeah,
$40,000. You could.
It's $40,000. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's money, but
yeah, sure.
But you could do it. But if you had to pay back the interest, and the principal, now it's $100,000.
Yeah, right.
And that's a whole different thing. You'd have far less money left over to go buy gasoline or cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where operators find themselves these days, right? Because they're now under pressure, obligated to repay money that they've borrowed and return more money into the pockets of their shareholders. So
and that's the different thing,
right? Yeah.
It?
So we need to think not so much just about, well, what's the price of oil going to be, or how much might it change, but really, what does the cash flow of the industry look like, or where is that headed? So so a couple of factoids, right? One is that when you think about shale wells, these horizontal wells we drill and frack and so forth, about 40% of the production of that well, of all the oil you're going to get back in the lifetime of that well, about 40% of it comes back the first year. And
so it's not 60, it's not 70,
but it's about 40%.
It's not quite half.
You totally recover from that. Yeah.
All right.
And from a net present value standpoint,
I bet it's a lot more.
About 50% of your net present value on the project is year one.
So that tells me that today's oil price, or the day you bring the well on, that oil price is a great big deal.
Yeah. So, you think about the riskiness of shale wells and the kind of returns that operators typically shoot for. We've often used a number that on a drilling project, operators looks at 20-25% as rate of return on the project. And then you think, well, where's the risk? What are the risk elements of that? So there's execution risk, there's the cost of getting the well drilled on budget and so forth. But because of the fact that so much of the production and so much of the revenue is generated in year one, price risk, especially year one price risk, becomes paramount. It becomes probably the single largest risk element of that project.
I mean, is it risk? Yeah. It's got to be. That makes it riskier than, say, offshore West Africa project,
where they might invest, and then the project may produce for 20 years, right? So over that 20-year time frame, the price of oil could go up or could go down, but it's going to be up and down, and so you can think about a long-term price deck.
This is not a 20-year project. It's a 1.5-year project, or so, even though the well is going to produce for 20 years, maybe or 50 years,
very low
maybe.
Levels. Yeah. Point is,
it's today.
Yeah, that's right. So these may be short cycle projects, but not necessarily low risk because of the pricing element. Now, I suppose you could hedge, and I'm surprised that more operators don't do that as a way to protect themselves in year one. But that's a subject for a different.
That's a different podcast. That's a different set of brothers.
Write that down so we can remember it. No, my point would be that probably the right way to think about the cash flow an operator would realize from a project is to say, okay, well, let's say the price of oil goes magically back to what it was 12 months ago.
What was it 12 months ago?
$57 a barrel. Okay. And so at that time, an operator would probably said, okay, I'm thinking about, going into 2020, right? I would have said, my spot price is 57. I'm going to give it a haircut and budget around using a $50 price.
Because even though there is this tendency of the oil companies to spend like drunken sailors, it's a conservative drunken sailor.
They've justified it based on what.
Okay, it's $50. I'm not going to spend like it's $57.50.
So the first thing we have to recognize is there's the spot price, but from a budget standpoint, give it a haircut of 10 to 15%. That's probably the budgeted price that projects get approved on using.
Right? Haircut number one is the conservative nature of oil and gas shale-related projects.
Going from spot to budget. Second thing you have to realize from a cash flow standpoint, I think, is, of course, that operator's going to have to pay royalties, going to have to pay production taxes, and he's going to have to pay some kind of an operating cost to get that oil out of the ground.
You need a workover rig, you need electricity, you need to haul off the water, you need to do something.
Stuff, right? So if you say that taxes and royalties account for about 20% of the price of oil, right? So now that $50 price becomes $40 after production tax after royalties. And then you have to give, I would say use an average of maybe $15 a barrel as your operating cost associated
with somebody or paying something
right.
to keep the well running.
So now you go from 40 to 25 when you net out those kind of operating costs.
So that's haircut number 2 is taxes, royalty, and operating costs.
Yeah, right. And in the past, the industry probably would have left it there and gone ahead. But nowadays, we have to go back and pay back our bankers, pay some money to our shareholders and so forth. It's interesting, again, the industry as a whole has really not returned money to credit. We haven't paid down, deleveraged balance sheets. And so
they've just wanted the interest payment.
They've just wanted the interest payment.
But now they want the principal back.
So we're feeling our way forward as to how much money might then, haircut number 3 would be money that now goes to creditors, shareholders. But let's say that that's 30%
of what's left.
Of what's left, right?
So I've already given it a 15% haircut, was haircut number 1,
right?
Which is the conservative nature of oil companies.
From 57 to 50, and then I've got another haircut number 2, which is the taxes, royalties,
and operating costs,
which gets me from 50 to 25 now, right?
And now I get another 30%
off of that, right? So now you're going. So that's another. So now you're down to 18 or 19 bucks a barrel. Would then be sort of the kind of money that's left over, I think,
to drill and complete new wells.
Complete wells, yeah, right. So we can think about. I think it's very important to understand that not all those monies that were available in the past are going to be available in 2021 or even 2022, because for a couple of years now, the industry as a whole is going to have to reestablish its credit worthiness, retired loans,
and pay money to your shareholders.
That's exactly
because
right.
when you've been doing this math, you've started with last year's oil price, $57.50.
Yeah,
I haven't looked out the window lately, but it's 40.
Yeah, it's 40-ish today, right? Yeah. So
what after you get the three haircuts?
It's very interesting. You think about what was that? What that case might be using a $40 price, because again, operators today are thinking about budgeting for 2021, right? And they're going to look out the window, like you said, and see a spot price of 40 and a future strip that's not much different. So $40 would be
and
a price.
And a very recent memory where a day's price of oil was negative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're going, I'm not shooting for 100.
2 days ago, the price of oil was 38, and so there's a lot of variation.
Yep.
So you take that $40 price, give it that 10 to 15% haircut. Now you get down to 35-ish.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Now you begin to net out 20% for royalties and taxes.
Yep.
You net out another $15 a barrel for operating costs, because that's a number that doesn't change. Much. Yeah. We talk about how oilfield service firms have discounted the cost of drilling a new well, but I don't think we've seen nearly the kind of discounting take place on the operating side.
No, because it's people and it's
power.
It's power. Right, yeah. It's disposal costs.
So all of a sudden now you go from 40 to 35 to now you net out all that second haircut. All told, now you've got left $13 a barrel.
Oh, I still got, and now I got the third haircut,
and then which is again take another 30% of that, maybe.
So $3 or $4.
Yeah, right, and hand that back to creditors and shareholders.
So that leaves me $8 or $9.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, that's not very much.
So again, one of the reasons why, you think about, well, why is rig count today 260, 265, or thereabouts? It's basically what we can sustain with a rig count with at an oil price of $40 a barrel. I think a handy rule of thumb is to take that net oil price,
the three haircuts,
after the three haircuts, multiply that number by 30 or 35 rigs per dollar. Okay, and now you get something like what rig activity should look like, I think.
So if you have, after the three haircuts, $10 times 35, that's 350 rigs.
Yeah, something like that.
And so today we have $8 or $9, that's
266 rigs, 65, something like that. So I think that gives us, a quick and easy way, but again, you have to think through each of the step of the process, all three haircuts we've talked about, as a way of getting us to what's rig activity going to be.
Okay, so if today's oil price of 40 becomes, not this Christmas, but next summer, something happens and it's 50.
Right. Yeah.
So it goes up $10. How much of that 10 ends up on the bottom line?
Well, if we go from 40 to 50, then that $8 or $9 price we were talking about now becomes more like $16.
It doubles.
Yeah. Well, not quite doubles. It goes up 60%. Yeah.
So, so that's the real lever here.
Yeah. Right. Yes. There's actually embedded in all of this is. Because again, we're at the low point.
Yeah.
There's that possibility that things could begin to ramp up on relatively modest changes in oil prices. If we're right now, we still have to feel our way forward and better understand how much of that free cash flow the industry is generating will be going into the hands of creditors and stockholders, but. So that's not entirely clear at this point, but I think that's there's clearly some opportunity for leverage in the process as oil prices begin to recover, and if people feel confident in basing their plans on those kind of higher prices.
So I've got a bonus question.
Let's hear this. Okay.
All right. So you've just spelled out how to get from oil price to rig count.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the ratio of drilling rigs to frac spreads running.
Oh, okay, right.
And I think it's about 2 drilling rigs for every 1 frac spread.
Right. Okay.
Is kind of it takes 2 drilling rigs to keep 1 frac spread busy.
Okay.
Pretty much. Mm-hmm. That you would see that 260 drilling rigs means 130 frac spreads in a normal era. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that ratio gets out of whack because I've built up a whole bunch of ducks?
Yeah, so I think that's the other issue that's going to make the next couple of years kind of fun, which is that some operators are going to sit there and say, geez, I have drilled that well, I haven't completed it, I certainly haven't hooked it up, and so rather than go drill and punch another hole, I'll take that $8 or $9 a barrel I have and use that as money to complete these wells, to pay for the frac job, put in the production infrastructure, do all those kinds of things. And so as a result, we may see the rig count number and the run a little lower relative to where frac activity is. Not a 2-to-1 number, maybe a 1.5 to 1 or something like that.
But it probably wouldn't last forever.
Well,
it's a season.
No, it's a question of sort of how big is that stack of drilled but uncompleted wells out there,
and how attractive are they actually, right?
And who owns them, and are those owners in a position to have any free cash to do that, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of stickiness in terms of sort of moving through that pile of work, that drilled but uncompleted work in progress number that you're thinking about. But I think that's the other thing that, again, that we'll be paying attention to is the prioritization that operators have. Do they need to drill wells in order to, because they don't have a large number of uncompleted wells to work through, or are they going to focus on bringing that uncompleted number down and before they put rigs back to work?
Because I can see the following situation unfolding as a result of your analysis here. Let's take an oil company last year who was really good at drilling a well, getting a pad done, and immediately completing those wells. Frack them right away. They don't have a bunch of ducks out there. And as they rolled into 2020 and saw, oh crap, look what's going on. They slowed drilling down, frack dropped right there with it. So they as an oil company didn't build up a bunch of ducks. Well, they're here in a new era. They don't have a bunch of ducks to do, so they can't accelerate, can they? They have to start step one, right? So it really does matter which oil company it is, even though you've got this average out there that's behaving, and a bunch of ducks in the hands of like everybody. On an individual oil company basis, those who last year were really efficient, drill complete, they don't have a whole bunch of wells to complete, probably, that would carry you into the next 2 years.
And the other thing, again, that I always try to remind folks when we talk about drilled but uncompleted wells is that they're uncompleted. That doesn't mean they're unfracked, because they could have been fracked, and now they're waiting for 2 or 3 or 6 months to be hooked up and put in production. We've certainly seen that in numbers that have come our way, that can be several months between the date of the frac job and the pipeline thing.
It could be 6 months later.
So that is again what makes me a little bit leery about looking at the numbers that get reported about drilled but uncompleted wells and trying to tie that number to frac activity, because they're not fracked. They're not unfracked. They're just not hooked up yet.
You don't file a permit to frack a well. It's just declared in production now, and so that date gets kicked down the road.
So anyway, I do think the notion of looking at cash flow is an important one. It's going to help us think through what activity is going to look like over the coming year and the next couple of years probably. But there's some big elements that we need to fine tune. And that's going to be part of what I put you to work with now that you're back in the office.
I'm full time.
Glad to hear that. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to us today. I'm John Spears.
And I'm Richard Spears.